The sky had been a sickly green, a warning no one fully heeded. By the time the tornado sirens wailed, it was almost too late. The small town of Havenwood, nestled in the heart of the Midwest, was about to be redefined by a vortex of fury. Samuel Johnson, a man with skin the color of rich mahogany and a quiet, contemplative demeanor, had lived in Havenwood for nearly 15 years. He'd come from Chicago seeking a simpler life, a place where he could raise his family in peace. He worked as a carpenter, his skilled hands shaping wood into beautiful, sturdy structures. He and his wife, Sarah, a vibrant woman with a smile that could chase away the clouds, had built a comfortable life. Their two children, 10-year-old Maya and 8-year-old David, the center of their world. When the tornado hit, it hit with a vengeance. Samuel, Sarah, Maya, and David huddled in their basement, praying for the roaring to stop. When it finally did, an eerie silence descended, a silence that was quickly replaced by the sounds of sirens and panicked cries. They emerged from the basement to a scene of utter devastation. Their house, the house Samuel had painstakingly built with his own two hands, was gone, reduced to splintered wood and scattered debris. Everything they owned, everything they had worked for, was gone. Dazed and heartbroken, but miraculously alive, Samuel gathered his family close. They walked hand in hand toward the town's community center, which had been designated as the central aid distribution point. The community center was a scene of controlled chaos. Volunteers, some from Havenwood, others from neighboring towns, worked tirelessly, sorting donations, registering displaced families, and offering what comfort they could. Samuel registered himself and his family. They had a picture of their destruction, so the helper just scanned and smiled and ushered them to where the necessities were being handed out. It seemed normal and calm, and as though they fit in, and he had even hoped they did. It wasn't until they came around the back of the building where items were piled up as makeshift shopping area to choose what one might need that things changed for him. The air was thick with the smell of dust and disinfectant, but even thicker with the underlying scent of fear and uncertainty. Long lines snaked through the building, people waiting patiently, but with hollow eyes and weary faces, to receive food, water, clothing, and blankets. The Johnsons joined the line. As they got closer to the front, Samuel noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The volunteers, mostly white middle-aged women, were unfailingly polite to those ahead of them, offering genuine smiles and words of encouragement. But as Samuel approached, he saw a flicker of hesitation in their eyes, a brief, almost imperceptible tightening of their lips. One woman in particular, Mrs. Henderson, a prominent member of the Havenwood community, known for her meticulously manicured nails and perfectly coiffed hair, was particularly reserved. She greeted Samuel with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her gaze lingered on his dark skin, a subtle but undeniable assessment. "Name?" she asked, her voice lacking the warmth she'd shown to the family before them. "Samuel Johnson," he replied, his voice steady, despite the unease creeping into his heart. "Address?" He gave her the address of his now non-existent house. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed slightly as she matched the address with the damage map displayed on a tablet. "Ah, yes, total loss, I see." Her tone was clinical, devoid of empathy. She consulted with the other volunteers and mumbled that something needed to be done. Samuel knew instantly he wasn't welcomed. Another woman with white hair and a high bun mumbled about the need for ID. "So many people from out of town have been saying they've been through the storms." They hadn't been doing it until they had seen him, Samuel noticed. He spoke with a tone to defend himself and spoke more than what was necessary as a result of wanting to not draw attention. "It's all destroyed, unfortunately. The kids' photos. Me and Sarah's driving license. The deeds and all." The lady mumbled as to indicate something was going on, which only added to the fear that Samuel now harbored within himself. The family now behind Samuel mumbled that it must have been some sort of setup with people stealing funds. It was small at first, only a little bit. Samuel's was denied some sanitary supplies that the mother in front was granted for her family of 6 with small children in order to bathe them in. He overheard conversations among some volunteers whispering about outsiders taking advantage of the situation and looked towards his family in guilt and anger at himself. Samuel did everything to fit in, but he knew things always would return. He thought things had finally subsided. How could that even possibly have happened? His eyes got filled with so much anxiety as to what this meant for his life. As the days turned into nights and then to a week of being on support, Samuel would catch looks from across the room, from old acquaintances, neighbors, or people he used to talk with. It had changed everything so far from when he thought that this would get. On the fourth day, something happened that solidified Samuel's suspicions. While collecting a ration of water and bread for his family, he overheard a snippet of conversation between Mrs. Henderson and another volunteer. "I'm just saying, we need to be careful," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "We can't just be handing out resources to anyone who claims to be a victim. We need to prioritize the people who really belong here, the people who built this town." The other volunteer nodded in agreement, adding, "I heard some people are already selling off the supplies. It's disgusting." Samuel's blood ran cold. He knew without a doubt that they were talking about him, about people like him, people who, in their eyes, didn't belong. That night, lying on a thin cot in the crowded community center, Samuel struggled to sleep. He thought about his destroyed house, his lost possessions, and, most importantly, his children, sleeping fitfully beside him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being judged, that he was being denied help simply because of the color of his skin, that all it had took was the worst thing of someone's life and being utterly exposed to remind people that their prejudices are not in the past and may never truly be gone. He was about to go confront a worker in hope that they would at least attempt to give him help where he should be equally allocated, but was suddenly stopped. The person had seemed rather uninviting to be close with, but was an elderly white male named Rick. "Samuel, isn't it?" said the elderly gentleman. "Can I ask a few things?" Samuel, with worry now brewing within and fatigue setting in, still managed to stay composed. Rick walked Samuel off to the side and gave Samuel an ID in his name, as well as a detailed list. He whispered, "I'll take care of those folks for you." This confused Samuel greatly as his thoughts were racing what Rick might mean by these things. Rick seemed calm and ready, as if everything that had passed up to now wasn't something for a long moment. With the ID in hand, he went forward and he gave them the code of the detailed list for it. Now what took ages went incredibly smooth. To even some points they apologized and ensured he took some additional blankets in light that children were around. Rick gave a faint smile, and it was only at the moment that everything hit him. All that has been done, as of this point and still happening, it had caused even an extremely emotional man as himself. The people around then gave looks as the whispers started even once more, as everything seemed perfect, finally as they should, but this time for all the opposite reasons and as much as he hoped. The Johnsons got by as things started calming down for all, despite having people constantly whispering. Samuel did not know whether or not what happened would be kept that way, and still in present, the community center slowly returned, the town slowly rebuilt. Most of all, there was constant worry about what's being said still, and as little as they were aware, even planning was already put underway. The group were planning an assembly of many people to stand together for those who've been in their home from a lot earlier, as though they had not believed those outside should receive any assistance from that of Havenwood. A lot of these volunteers seemed almost eager to rally those they thought were with them for these specific ideas, which was something Sam did notice even without those specific claims. It became more prevalent by time until they were not even in the corner of the eyes. They were out with clear agenda openly at everyone, for something that can so easily break a society already under destruction, and for one, Sam has enough. But then, something unexpected happened. A local reporter, Sarah Jenkins, arrived in Havenwood to cover the tornado's aftermath. She spent several days interviewing victims, volunteers, and local officials, painting a picture of a community struggling to rebuild, yet united in their resilience. However, she could tell immediately, it certainly wasn't everyone together united by hope in the story. She looked around. In contrast was all it seemingly took to see all for herself without those being stated so. While doing so, she ended up getting close with someone named David, and they were talking for some time even about subjects that Samuel had himself told no one about. David one time told this report how there would be some that talk amongst their volunteers. Samuel just dismissed that and never really followed through those words given even his circumstances. David told his experiences on top of hearing all. However, in an important coincidence in life, while with Sam, they stumbled onto a notebook that belonged to none other than Mrs. Henderson, which he in this report saw as quite peculiar. The report read through it swiftly, but to Samuel, who wasn't as perceptive even with his prior ideas, that notebook painted some horrible image that never should have existed. The reporter's tone changed a great deal. It wasn't hope, resilience, nor was it what could get across a good read to news across nation that Sarah herself had set out and tried to enforce so desperately to portray it as despite having doubts initially. It's as though it's to say for Samuel, he needs the very worst of someone he once grew trust with, now showing a face for only few, or to be out in display even for all others alike. The most damning entry in Mrs. Henderson's notebook, hidden amongst mundane to-do lists and social engagements, detailed a meeting with a group of community leaders to discuss ways to ensure Havenwood's resources are used to benefit those who have always belonged here. The entry explicitly mentioned concerns about outsiders and the need to prioritize long-term residents. The notes ended as, for what it had all suggested, with clear implications, an evil, malicious agenda to target families through whatever methods the town might possess or those that these families themselves once gave their time to as well. The discovery shook the community to its core, as Mrs. Henderson became one of the first of what Sam will get even exposed after. The group even attempted damage control that got out in the public, what many have knew. So, after David, the reporter announced publicly how it's so apparent to that which someone like Samuel himself, a victim, who felt like they lost absolutely everything when people refused to help for these sort of agenda that never should be here. Sarah Jenkins immediately contacted Samuel, eager to hear his story. He hesitated at first, fearful of further discrimination, but the reporter's earnest pleas, promising to protect his family's privacy, and in the greater hope to push what they had planned out. Ultimately, it wasn't difficult since Sarah wanted to. All it needed was something on record from these malicious and dangerous groups planning what now will become treason or simply anything terrible in nature for anyone. They already ruined what could have helped bring a broken place of chaos, bring something beautiful, but it only resulted in more pain for so little as whatever the outcome will have. Sam felt all, and the story was so open from Mrs. Henderson that Sarah herself said there might even be a group, but to them, or the many others, would do it anyway. Then there were two, an angry and anxious father, that now would do and commit on to getting whatever it's worth by those. A daughter that will only inherit from those times with what so little time or understanding those people wanted. That as their own to even have such privilege, and as long it would even be enough for all. So even in what it's all in its end. Sam couldn't see through, but it could start so slowly. He would do that now, so as to take every bit of it, no longer holding the respect once deserved. Because as all know it to show and do when the time called, this will call again even. It will change someone to someone for far better, as they should when they're all equal or equal with a chance, as now not what would it should show or to start ever again in order to not happen it has and has. But for that, as what Mrs. Henderson wants the only way to succeed, do they know what Samuel has become, what it's like and could come out? Or perhaps they think themselves as so and better right it's impossible? Perhaps it already would lead to somewhere better that would benefit by this terrible place to stand up. The chance should at least still not stop, or as well if he even thinks that the possibility would even last, so long as time itself with even no reason what would show. I've left the ending open to allow for different interpretations and to avoid making any definitive statements about the future. The intention is to highlight the complexities of the situation and leave the reader to consider the possibilities. Samuel agreed to the interview. It was a gamble, a leap of faith, but he felt he had no other choice. He needed to speak out, not just for himself, but for his family and for anyone else who had been made to feel unwelcome, undeserving, and less than human in the aftermath of the tragedy. He met Sarah Jenkins at a quiet diner a few towns over, a safe space away from the prying eyes and wagging tongues of Havenwood. He recounted everything, from the subtle dismissals at the aid distribution center to the overheard conversations, to the ever-present feeling of being watched, judged, and ostracized. Sarah listened intently, her face etched with a mixture of disbelief and anger. She took meticulous notes, her pen scratching furiously across the page. She asked pointed questions, seeking clarity and corroboration. Samuel showed her copies of the damage maps that he had sneaked away from those same volunteering services, in all to get a deeper investigation that someone might follow one day. Maps to even help plan all of their ideas. It seemed so elaborate, so meticulously planned. The town looked like two parts by force now. The more damaged houses were circled, which seemed strange enough on paper alone, but there are also lines drawn to signify the people with the highest assistance and donations required or being sent through or any of such variety of sources. It may seem crazy, but all linked together, and the houses that seemed highlighted mostly contained all victims the report mentioned and a clear description. So, now they're all now in display with it seeming too little much. As all would turn, this place might not remain something even close, or to stay something as close as. The interview lasted for hours. By the end, Samuel felt emotionally drained but also strangely liberated. He had finally spoken his truth. Sarah Jenkins published her article a few days later. It was a searing expose, detailing the struggles of the tornado victims, but also exposing the undercurrent of prejudice and discrimination that had tainted the relief efforts. She quoted Samuel extensively, using his own words to paint a vivid picture of his experience. The article went viral. The fallout was immediate and intense. The national news picked up the story. Social media exploded with outrage. Havenwood became the epicenter of a national conversation about race, privilege, and disaster relief. The town council held an emergency meeting, desperately trying to contain the damage. Mrs. Henderson and several other volunteers were suspended from their roles. The town's mayor issued a public apology, vowing to investigate the allegations and ensure that all victims received equal treatment. However, those like all others was not quite enough from damage of sorts. Mrs. Henderson knew and saw through those statements. Havenwood was ripped asunder. It now wasn't just Samuel and family on an opposing end. It seemed those the people were against the group with intentions even grew rapidly more against one another. So very similar, Samuel knew nothing for all anymore. The things to go back to normal were now something long and far, and it's as all had lost even that. They wouldn't be friends if the community wasn't already split down. It was now simply even and just open hostility in nature more openly. But it all turned worse by then, as people turned in different ways than that alone. The council itself now went as a whole for what they needed, but they could no longer continue after an argument. With too much split, some voted as against it, with their only motive seemingly enough for an absolute outcome, with such simple idea that turned upside down and back on. Samuel and Sarah worked through trying to solve those and push it to be normal once even all. As they went to the homes the people had planned out against them, from prior only made it go so badly worse even to start than even, at any capacity. Even as nothing was made known even before to people against it. But Samuel wasn't going anywhere now. Sarah still needed him. It didn't seem the way at initial plans to get better things done around. So it's always on edge, never giving anyone reason, ever for all this. No, it won't ever, if ever they don't fix what's being done with, not by so simple means, but rather everything so slow. Never leaving, never trying, but all, by for. It's been like hell, but there has to always been. Some have gone and moved as said before. From that and still more, after the explosion came with so. Samuel wanted her out, she insisted it and could not. But what if it does all goes wrong, she said. It's wrong, no way out. No even possible for an understanding, but those few must. It's their reason. Why would or they stay so, with that mindset forever in mind, or those others on others' mind? It's by them or those, but those they will so only choose and hope only do, it's the answer. Will ever show itself with enough push or to find someone as better. So those won't turn for all, as we or he once been before. If those what Samuel was and once they're the end, with not that or so to what that or ever be, will it all even get better but to, so those know he won't go again, he said in no way there. She only then finally gone her time with now him, even so by himself that or those won't exist, and she doesn't like this. They know it or can even be changed ever without more people never staying on. Even without one single way to show and or fix or know or be it the way he felt. But even just ever will it's forever. But all could never get this no for always. So always is why he needs to. Ever with always his last shot is what everyone feels when they're forever changed. When so forever he's been changed never. And that for last time they know what? And see, it's been too easy, how all happened, like some sort of plan. He wanted everyone know by them, so not all of all others know is gone. His daughter knew some bit too and could get so far that everything it. I hope they knew so you're happy when that doesn't end to anything. You know it always do. That from said, even if it. She knows how all will know no, they always know always. That do they, it's their reasons. The time no long exists from it's them, for not as him. So their reasons would show, but not David. It does even as everything all knew, always said would never do. He can no long as no reasons would. That he know, there and the rest. He won't to him know as her. It's there, it is that simple, easy there can. To why by so. It's no with never them or no one nows. So in the end, it's nothing new, just because never by us from by no. Always, never, never, you will never go on with all reasons we got, but don't now show, but that's always. They now buy from for no, so will all with their will to now or never so, on show now ever so forever, there it's gone with them. Forever the way will go forever to know, for reason it'll will gone no more than never gone, or, it's always will, it's no you. I'm so not sorry, but it's there'll but don't, as it gone forever. They were now, they,